Hi, everyone, and welcome into Conversations with Dr. Charles. I'm Pat Bryant, and I work with the Emmy brand. And we're so excited once again to have Dr. Charles Ackle join us. And these are just conversations where we're chatting about a variety of different things going on in the health world, particularly focused on the immune system, immunology, and gut health, as well as mental health, brain health. And today we're going to talk about one of those elements, which is stress and how the brain deals with stress and the connections between the brain and the gut. You know, most people think of stress as being a mental concern, and certainly it is, but we're going to dive deep into the pool. So you see Dr. Ackle here, and let me just introduce Dr. Ackle to you very quickly. We're always so pleased to have a conversation with him. He's the Chief Medical Officer here at Emmy, and Dr. Ackle has a great background. He is a fellow with the Royal College of Surgeons in the UK. You'll hear his British accent in just a moment if you haven't heard him before. And he's also been awarded the prestigious Hallett Prize in the UK, in addition to a number of awards that he earned as an undergraduate. He trained in medicine at Guy's Hospital in London and researched into transplantation and immunology early in his career. And Dr. Ackle, I think it's safe to say that sparked a flame that's been burning ever since and continues to burn bright today as we talk about immunology and all the connections that he will get into. Dr. Ackle is a prominent London-based surgeon for many years and a pioneer in the development of laparoscopic surgery, and he actually trained many prominent physicians in the UK and in Europe in that process. The thing that I really love at the very end is that you've been a person who's been a strong advocate for private and public partnerships in the UK and also across Europe. So, Dr. Ackle, that's just a short introduction. We could make it much longer and it would all be true. But welcome again. It's great to spend a little bit of time with you.
Thank you, Pat. Very kind of you, very kind words. One can but try. It's been a long journey. It's a long
That's right.
journey.
And continuing for much longer. So, we want to make sure that you understand these are being produced and sponsored by Emmy, IMMY. And you'll find more information about us at immy.co, emmy.co. We invite you to go there. Also, we invite you to hit that subscribe button below to make sure that when we produce these, if you find these useful and helpful and insightful, be sure you subscribe to those and make sure that when we produce a new one, you're the first one to get the alarm. So, Dr. Ackle, speaking of alarms, let's dive in and talk about stress today. Stress has become an epidemic issue and kind of tied to anxiety. So as we talk a little bit about stress, in your words, what is stress exactly, and what's the difference between stress and anxiety?
A really difficult question. Most people probably know the answer intuitively. The story I tell, or the analogy, is if you're a creature living on a savanna, big open plain, and a lion comes to get you, you do what's called the fight or flight response. You get a kick of adrenaline, and either you run like hell, which is probably why some of our Kenyan athletes are so fantastic, because one of them, I seem to remember, used to go and get lions to chase him, which made him run a lot quicker.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, absolutely true.
It would make me
The other one is like a cat. You just poop yourself and you
right.
get eaten, right? Now that's acute stress, right? That's a sort of adrenaline rush. It's actually quite good for you. If
Yes.
something attacks you or cuts you, you get an acute response. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You
And
see,
it can save your life if it
yeah,
needs. Yeah.
exactly. And in fact, it is designed to save your life. That's the whole point of having that adrenaline response. But think of the other guy, the other poor schmuck who is living in the forest. There are lots of bears in the forest, and behind every tree, there might be a bear. So he goes to one tree and he says, oh my God, is there a bear behind that? And then he goes to the next one. Then he goes to the next one. So the poor chap is constantly on alert. He's constantly stressed. He's getting chronic stimulation of his fight or flight response. He's got too much cortisone going around, which is usually a good thing. But if it's constant, for example, that immunosuppression is induced by corticosteroids and similar agents. So this is corroborated by a wonderful study we did thanks to a colleague of mine, Professor Stefan Reber at Ulm University and Chris Lowry at Boulder. They took a bunch of city slickers living in a concrete jungle who'd never had any exposure to animals or anything in the way of farm animals or whatever, and compare them to a group of guys who worked on a farm, were constantly wallowing in poop and animals. And they did a stress test, a particular kind of test. I won't go into the details. But what this clearly showed was that the guys who lived in the countryside showed a very good acute immune response where their adrenaline went up and everything else. But their immune system, which is also responsive and critically responsive to stress, shot up. And they showed all the stress factors. But within 2 or 3 hours, it was back to normal. City slickers, however, they started their stress levels in immune responses just slightly higher, not statistically significant, but slightly higher. And they went up, but not so much. And then it took a much longer time for them to get back to normal. Now, we surmise that, and the people who published the paper are smarter than I am, that this was a measure of, if you like, chronic stimulation, that the city slickers were not as immunologically competent in terms of responding to stress as they. We've seen this with the mycobacteria. We learned about stress, and why we're interested in stress is that some of the early studies on cancer patients with sister organisms showed that these patients were responding incredibly well in terms of emotion, in terms of diet, in terms of well-being. We're now beginning to understand the mechanisms whereby this happens. But one of the first explanations was from, again, Professor Christopher Lowry at Boulder, who showed that the organisms stimulate the nerves in the brain that produce serotonin. Serotonin is the happy molecule,
Right.
And it makes people cope better.
Serotonin.
Serotonin, but it also has an effect on microglia. Microglia are brain immune cells that are hyped up, and they calm down and settle down and behave in the correct way. And of course, the linkage between the gut and the brain is so important. We've only recently realized how critically important it is, but it's actually a two-way street. So it goes up and the brain affects the gut. Now, any of you who've had a close call in an accident or a car will feel that awful feeling in the pit of your stomach and then passes, right? But if it happens continuously, then you're going to get constant bellyache, and you'll develop what's called irritable bowel syndrome. You might then develop allergic responses and all sorts of other problems that are due to chronic stress inducing chronic inflammation. So acute inflammations, like acute stress, it's good for you. It's designed to protect you. But chronic stress, chronic inflammation is not good. Nobody wins. And this is where cancer particularly uses it as leverage to survive. Cancer is like a parasite. It wants to live. It's a bit stupid because it kills you, but sensible cancers don't kill you until you've reproduced, right? So, maybe they're like politicians. I don't know, but I won't get into politics.
That's for another episode.
That's another episode. So anyway, the point about stress is that it is very much linked between what happens in the gut, what happens in the brain. Now, we've learned more about this because there's a whole cohort of patients who have what's called myalgic encephalopathy, chronic fatigue syndrome, post-viral syndrome, the whole bunch of dustbin names. And were always thought by their doctors to be, basically, they needed to man up. This was just they were just wimps, right? Until long COVID came along. One of the great things about COVID is we suddenly realized that something like 20% of the population are suffering from the after effects of COVID. And this is manifested by chronic stress responses, which induce anxiety, depression, and goodness knows what else in terms of damage to the heart and lungs and things. Suddenly, maybe myalgic encephalopathy and chronic fatigue syndrome wasn't something that was in your head, that you imagined. It's real. And of course, it is real. And so many patients have been so badly handled by my colleagues that they don't seem to understand that this is a real, very painful effect. And my own son had a problem like this, and I won't go into those details. But you do the blood tests, they all appear normal, unless you do the more sophisticated tests in the laboratory and transcriptome studies and things, which will then demonstrate that your immune cells are not functioning properly. or you stimulate those immune cells and you then realize that actually they're not functioning properly. So it's
So, so
hard.
Dr. So, Dr. Ackle, here we go again. If anybody's watched the first couple of conversations that we've had, am I wrong? I mean, it just seems like everything in the body is working its way through the immune system, or the immune system has some sort of positive or negative effect if it's not working appropriately. It just seems to be such a systemic issue. Is that correct?
Well, the immune system is an absolute fundamental. It is the fundamental of all that you are, basically. It is something that protects you. It is something that heals you because it reconstructs. And it's also something that can destroy you. So the immune system is incredibly integrated with our entire living system. And without the immune system, you can't function. We know that you die very quickly, whether you die of infection or you die of a viral reaction or a cancer. That's going. So the immune system is absolutely fundamental, and tuning the immune system is also fundamental. That's why we need constant reiteration of tuning with the immune system, not just once and that's it. You've got to keep doing it. That's why the gut has to be farmed with an F. Sure, we all know about lactobacilli and firmicutes and all these other bacteroides. There are 30 to 40,000, ideally, different organisms that should be running riot in your gut and interacting with the rest of you because they produce goodies, vitamins, they teach your gut how to work, they protect you against bad infection because the bad guys haven't got space to get in, etc., etc. So your immune system and your gut and the brain are just so interlinked. You try to separate them and you've got problems.
Yes. It sounds like from what you were saying earlier in relationship to stress, or in relation to stress, it almost sounds like you develop a cortisol resistance. Like it just takes more and more and more for your body to be able to respond appropriately to the stress that you're putting on that. So with the connection to the gut, and until meeting you, I had no understanding of the connection between what's going on in the brain and what's happening in the gut. But we've all had that gut, that sinking gut feeling that you're saying is connected. So how does that gut brain axis work, and how can we affect it positively in terms of actually treating that?
Well, like I said, I think that you're exactly right, that we've now realized the vital importance of the microbiome. In fact, we know even in cancer therapy that if your microbiome isn't looked after properly, you're not going to respond even to standard chemotherapy, never mind immunotherapy. And again, there are
And
lots of stories.
and Dr. Ackle, what's a microbiome for those who may have heard that word the first time?
Good. Yes, the microbiome are the organisms that live in, on, and around you, but particularly the ones in the gut and in the lungs. Now, everybody thinks of the bacteria, but they forget what I call dark matter. In fact, somebody's published a book on the dark matter because there are viruses, there are bacteriophages, which are viruses that feed on bacteria, there are archaea, there are candidate phylum radiation. There is every single kind of material in there, most of which we still don't know anything about. So it's like the universe, the dark matter in the universe. Universe consists of whatever percentage, 30, 40, 50% dark matter, which we don't understand. And the same applies to the microbiome. But we do understand it's important and it needs to be farmed. And one of the critical things that we've learned is diversity. It's not individual bacteria that people will try and sell you that matter in terms of the colonization, but it's variety. It's the diversity that is the spice of life. And the more diverse it is, the more effective it is. All these organisms talk to the immune system in the gut, which talks to the brain, and the brain then talks back again, and it keeps going. The engine's got to keep running. IMI, and it's like the mycobacteria and certain other factors which have been described by wonderful people like Professor Graham Rook and John Stanford, include the mycobacteria, which are environmental commensals. These are parasites, if you like, that are beneficial, that pass through the gut. The thing about the mycobacteria is they do not colonize the gut except for when they're pathogens like tuberculosis. They poop through and they have a transient effect and they're gone. And that's a bit like giving the wheel a constant push so that the wheel keeps turning and the engine keeps running. And that's just so important. The minute everything stands still and you get stagnation, things go wrong. The minute
Mhm.
you try and push things backwards with chronic inflammation, they go wrong. So this is why we think our environmental replacement, which is the Lysi bacteria, the things like aurum, and in particular aurum, because we've been able to develop it as such, uh, may replace some of those factors that have been lost in our modern life and modern society.
Yeah, and just so fascinating as we draw this conversation to a close. You know, the combinations or the connections between the brain and the gut, and we're going to talk specifically about that in greater detail as we pull in other wonderful things like anxiety and other things that are manifest as mental issues and brain issues that I think people are just coming around to understand how the gut and how the immune system are involved in all of that. We're an interconnected being. You know, none of those live in isolation, and it'll be a fascinating conversation. So again, Dr. Ackle, this is just great to do, and we're so excited to continue this and talk about a wide variety of things. If you're watching this and you'd like more information, not just about stress, but about a wide variety of things related to gut health, to immune health, to brain health, we're going to be covering the gamut as we go through this. And we invite you again, be sure you hit the subscribe button so that you get notified when these are new. And also go to emmy.co, that's IMMY.co. We'd love for you to learn more about Emmy and the Myceliaceae bacteria strain that Dr. Ackle talks so much about. And we're excited to offer that to you. So, Dr. Ackle, look forward to our next conversation.
Pleasure.